What if the oldest stories were not warnings, but invitations, and the thing inviting you already knows your name? What if the echo you hear in dark timber is not an echo at all, but something breathing in time with your steps, learning your rhythm, waiting for the moment you mistake it for yourself? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I have something truly haunting for you. From a cedar that whistles when there is no wind, to masks made of ash that do not hang where you left them, to a stone that hums like a throat, every story here is a mystery waiting to unfold. Some of these will sound true, because they are told the way true stories are told, quietly, with details you only notice when you're too close to back away. Which story creep you out the most? Let me know in the comments. Story 1. The whistling cedar. I did not believe a tree could learn a person, until the cedar in the flats breathed in time with me and whistled back my name through resin like a mouth that had practiced for weeks. The forest kept close that night, wet on the sleeves and cold on the teeth. My headlamp pressed a pale tunnel through needles that drank the light. Pitch sweetened the air the way sugar sweetens coffee when you have not earned it. And fog lifted slow from the river like the water had decided to climb. There was no wind at all, not a branch creak, not a shiver of leaves. Only drip counting drip on thick moss, and beneath that, the regular metronome of my own breathing, louder than it should be, as if something nearby needed the tempo. My job was simple on paper: reset the blown weather sensor at mile 4, tighten the trail closure tape, sweep back before daybreak. I could have traded the shift, plenty of people did after last autumn, but I told Noreen I would take the grove. Her brother Daniel had vanished between the switchbacks and the cedar flats, and we still spoke of him like he had stepped out for coffee and would be right back. If I skipped the route again, I would lose more than a night's pay. I would lose face with the crew, and I would lose a promise I made at a kitchen table where grief sat in the chair beside me. There were 3 kinds of loss in my head as I hiked. If I bailed again, my reputation would thin to paper. If I steered wide of the grove, I would fail the people who still salted a plate for Daniel. If I stayed and the storm tossed a limb the size of a canoe, it could be my ribs next. I told myself risk is honest. I told myself the woods listen for the truth in how you say it. I touched the first red survey tape and felt a cold slick on my glove where pitch had stained the trunk. The tape had 3 knots, tight ones, cinched until the plastic pinched pale around each twist. When the forest held its breath, the strip stirred like someone brushed by. When a faint stir finally touched my cheek, the tape went still. It was wrong in a small way, and small wrongs matter because they add up before you notice the total. Then the whistle came. 2 notes, hollow, like a bottle mouth, a broken breath that sounded curious rather than cruel. It rose from the right, where the grove thickened, and it paused at the end as if it waited for me to answer. I did not answer. If you have spent nights alone among trees, you already know there are calls that are not questions. I watched the bark seam that looked like an eye half shut. Sap beaded there, cold even through my glove, and the smell of wet cedar moved into the back of my mouth. My radio stuttered at the precise second the whistle fell quiet, a cracked syllable in my own register, thin as if it had been stretched. It felt like hearing yourself on an old voicemail from a phone you no longer own. Boot prints crossed the trail. The tread faced toward me, then climbed a root, then on the far side it reversed, as if the wearer changed direction in a mid-air step. On moss, there was no compression, no darker green, no water ring, only the clean edges of a pattern the way a child draws around shoe. The tape ahead flickered. I could see 3 knots again, and when I walked toward them, the strip behind me shivered in still air as if the woods had turned its head and looked where I had just been. The radio hissed on a dead channel, and I toggled to dispatch. For company, not help. I set my call sign. My name answered, but the sound came thin, like a portable speaker under a blanket, my exact vowels trailing a half beat behind. I told myself it was a loop or a sticky push to talk, and I tightened the clip and set the speaker higher on my shoulder. I wanted to believe the obvious thing, because the obvious thing does not change the rules under your feet. The trail doubled back in lazy folds to keep tourists from sliding down the shoulder. I walked it slow, counting markers 1, 2, 3, The third one should have been the big rock where people like to stack smaller rocks when no one is watching, but it was another strip of red ribbon with 3 knots. I looked back and saw the second marker ahead of me again, which is not how lines behave unless they have been taught to make circles. I checked for my own tracks, found them crossed by the same reverse tread, the same route. The whistle let out another 2-note test, a little longer, like a child learning a song. I stood with the light off and let the dark come to my skin. If you have not done this, try it one night. You will realize your body is a weather vane. Air kissed one cheek, then the other. The fog climbed from ankle to knee in a way that did not feel natural, and my breath made 3 small clouds before it faded. I did not do that on purpose, but the woods noticed because the whistle paused between my exhales in a rhythm that felt too familiar. The grove opened when I expected a wall of trunks. The cedar in the center rose out of a tangle of roots that looked like ribs. Offerings nestled in the hollow, a coin black with old fingerprint oil, a ribbon that had once been blue, a carved bead tied with a strip of red tape stained brown, and a tiny jar with a paper lid pressed down with twine. The bark seam I had touched earlier no longer read as an eye. It read as lips, pressed and softening, resin glassing the edges. The whistle came again, not from the air, but from the wood, the whole trunk humming like a flute when you find the true angle. My radio chimed a low battery warning while it still showed 2 bars. The channel clicked, and I heard myself whisper, "Hold on." I had not pressed a talk. That made the first real question rise from the ground up, not the head down. Who was listening from inside the wood, and when had it learned my breath? I backed into ferns, and a loose strip of red tape slipped across my wrist and tightened by a hair like a test of weight. I pulled back. The tape skimmed my glove and hissed with a wet sound that did not belong to plastic. I moved because standing still felt like waiting for a hand to close. The path refused to remain a path. Tape appeared where it had not, and every time the wind thought about waking, the strips held still. When the forest froze, they fluttered. Someone on my left made a small hush sound, the kind people make when they do not want to shout. I turned for a headlamp, but only fog and the thin outline of a younger cedar waited, leaning like a shoulder. That was when the prints showed again. The same reverse tread, the same dainty pause on a root, the same weightless outline that did not bruise the moss. I followed, because people who fake things lead somewhere, even if it is to a bad joke. The prints climbed a log at a height that would force a normal stride to widen. The marks ran 20 steps, then spanned a ditch with no smear where a heel would push and no crater where a toe would land. The prankster theory felt good for a minute. Bone whistle, reverse saws, local kids making their own campfire story at my expense. Then the evidence got serious about itself and lifted above the ground. A sweeter wave of pitch slid into my nose, colder, cleaner, and the air around me tightened like a belt. The whistle answered from behind me while I looked forward, which made a discomfort I could feel in my teeth. It timed itself to stillness. That was the rule. I realized it, and it realized I realized it, or that is how it felt. The trees observed my breath as if they were taking notes, and the whistle played back what it had learned. I tried dispatch again, not for help, for a human reply. The speaker gave me a new sound, the tiny sibilant inhale a person takes before words, then my name and my voice, fragile, as if it had lost weight on the way out. The battery dropped to 1 bar, and the cold found its way to my wrist where the tape had skimmed. Fog thickened to thigh height, and the trunks pressed closer, which was an illusion, but not a comforting one. Without deciding, I reached the cedar again, which is to say, I never left it. The offerings rearranged themselves like a shelf someone dusted. The paper lid on the jar had caved inward as if a mouth had sucked air through it. The bead tied with red tape sat on top now, and the hole was ringed with something dark that did not shine. The bark seam looked less like lips and more like a mouth trying a new word. I thought of Daniel and how he tied 3 quick knots when he was hurried, faster than writing a note. I found 3 knots in the tape through the bead, tails frayed where impatient fingers had pulled and pulled. Headlights moved pale through the tree's downslope. The road crew late, as usual. I had a minute, maybe 2, before a spotlight would sweep the grove and put more eyes on whatever this was. If their light found me with the cedar, it might bring the echo to them. I could keep silent and let the crew walk into the same rule, or I could lure the sound into the trunk and try to pin it there. Neither choice was clean. One felt worse. I breathed in small and evened 3 times the way someone does when they try not to cry. The whistle rose to meet me, eager. I leaned close and put my mouth near the softened seam and lifted the radio so the speaker kissed the resin. The tape looped my wrist without my noticing and tightened in a polite way that was not polite at all. I whispered the simplest thing I could think to say. I am here. The cedar opened, not like a mouth, more like a seam in fabric that realizes it can be a door. From inside the hollow came the furniture of a life. A coin that had paid for luck once. A ribbon that remembered a name. A small patch I knew by the crooked stitch, Noreen stitch. The bead with red tape, its hole dark, and the faint scent of cold sap that lives in winter, even in summer. The whistle shaped my name like a question that wanted a full answer, name and all. The twist turned in my chest then. Daniel had not been lost to weather. He had fed his breath to this place until it fit and stayed. Names bind. Everybody knows that, even people who pretend not to. The cedar did not want my body. It wanted my name spoken into wood. It wanted a promise shaped like syllables, the way a lock wants to write. I thought of the habit we all have now, talking into little machines as if they will carry us where we need to go. I pressed the radio harder into the opening. My speaker filled the gap. Feedback should have screamed, but instead a hush folded in on itself like cloth, and in that hush my voice came back, hold on, in a calm that surprised me. The loop bit my wrist then, quick and mean. The resin slicked the radio face and made my fingers slip. Headlights brushed the far trunks, and a searcher's beam began to move. I did not have time to ask or beg. I made a bargain without words. Take this voice, not mine. Take the radio and the copy you already learned, and let the rest of me walk. The cedar understood in the way a fire understands dry kindling. It swallowed the speaker grill, swallowed the top button of my jacket, closed its seam until only a slit showed, and then not even that. The tree spoke. It said my name in my voice. And for a second, I felt proud of how steady I sounded, a foolish pride, the kind you feel when you do not yet know the price. The tape slackened. I fell back into fern and dirt. The searcher called my name, their voice, not the trees, and I lifted my light like a swimmer lifting a hand above black water. The cedar stood ordinary again. The offerings looked as if a hand that was not a hand had set them just so. The smell of pitch went cold the way a storm lets go all at once at dawn. They led me out on the cut road. I said I was fine. I said the radio must have taken a splash. I did not say the speaker was gone. I did not say I left a piece of my breath inside something that could use it better. If you have ever felt your lungs lag by a beat when you climb stairs and known it is not the stairs, you know the odd hollow that followed me into the truck, that sense that the world was practicing my rhythm from the outside. Daybreak came at 5:37 a.m. flat and gray over the ridge. The whistle stopped like a clock hitting the hour. I made my report, the safe version, the one that keeps a job and avoids a fight no one can win. I went home and tried to sleep, but when I breathed near the window, 3 little clouds formed in the cold patch of glass. 1, 2, and a longer one, as if my lungs had learned someone else's counting. The spare handheld on my counter clicked at 5:37 a.m. with the sound of 3 slow inhales, patient, interested like someone getting ready to speak. That night, a cedar cone waited on my porch. Red tape looped through, tied with 3 knots, the ends cut neat. Noreen texted that she dreamed Daniel said home in a voice that did not echo like it had for months. Dreams are dreams, grief does what it wants, but I set the cone by the kitchen window anyway. The loop swayed when the apartment held still. If you're listening, you understand what that means, and if you are not, you will think it was the heater, which is kinder. I have not gone back to the grove after dark. Not because fear rules me, though fear has a vote, but because I think the tree is still learning, and I do not want to teach it more. When a spare radio clicks at the wrong hour, I leave it on the table and go to the door. The hallway smells like wet wood after rain. I put my ear to the crack, and I hear a person across the way practicing 3 small exhale sounds that are close to my own and getting closer. If you ever hear 2 notes become 3 when the air is perfectly still, do not answer me. The quiet that follows knows how to hold what you give it. And if you find red tape tied with 3 knots and a bead stained dark, leave it where it lies. Some messages are meant to keep their place, and some invitations remember the way you breathe longer than you do. Story 2. Ash masks by the river. I used to think the river only took what slipped until the night the ash mass turned to face me and the water paused like a chest holding its breath to listen. It was one of those damp watches where the fog hangs low and the lantern makes a small yellow island. The weird slats ticked as current shouldered through, steady as a heartbeat on a machine. Wet ash smelled like a cooled fire in old books, and the silt had a metal taste that stayed at the back of the tongue. Birch leaves stuck to my boots, as if the river wanted to keep a record of my steps. Somewhere a night bird tried a single note and gave up, the way timid people do when others are already talking. I was on salmon count. Night shift. Walk the catwalk, log flashes of muscle through the slots. Make sure nothing clogged the grates. They asked for 2 people, but it was only me because my coworker June was late, and I am the sort who tells myself I can cover both sides. There were other reasons I stayed. Last spring, a friend of mine went under near here and did not come up where you expect. His parents hung 3 masks made from river mud and ash on the downstream rails. A way of saying keep going, do not look back. People do things like that when they need to be heard by water. The masks were simple ovals with hollow eyes and small mouths, strung with twine. If you have ever made one, you know the inside texture, cool and grainy like something that should not want to touch. These had dried weeks ago, but the closest one still felt faintly damp. I brushed it and soot printed my fingers. My clipboard picked up a gray touch at the corner like a fingerprint that did not care if it mapped to a hand. I wrote down the hour and the water height to keep the rhythm of a job, because rhythm is a raft in a night like this. People talk about a kid who tees up tricks along the river path. They say he wears reverse soles to make footprints backward and blows a bone whistle under the bridge to scare the summer cruise. I found a gum wrapper once near a print, and my brain wanted to use that small, ordinary thing as a lid on bigger questions. Tonight, I saw prints again on the slick green at the footing stones. They stepped across slime without scuff, no smear at the edges, no small comet tails where a heel drags. That lid did not fit anymore, and the bigger question rose like a bubble that refused to pop. The bell on the upstream chain rang once. It should not ring when the fog is thick, because the rule is the bell rings when air goes clear. The sound had that wet edge that tells you it came from close, not far. I turned, expecting June's light, but the shoreline held only willow shadows and one darker place that looked like a person until my eyes decided it was not. The river slackened for a breath then, as if it listened to itself. The ash smell lifted like dust from a book someone opened on a page with my name. The masks faced downstream when I started rounds. I saw that. Everyone hangs them to tell the water, keep moving, take what is yours and go. Now the closest oval looked upstream at me. It had turned on its cord with a little twine groan I had not heard. I froze. If you have ever told yourself the small wrong thing will be the last wrong thing, you know the feeling at the base of my skull. I touched the mast to set it right, and the inside felt warm, faintly, the way a pocket feels that has been empty of a hand for a minute, not an hour. June's headlamp finally bobbed through the tunnel of willows, then paused. She texted that her car died twice, and she might need the booster after. I told her to hold at the gate and wait for me to walk back. The dam was due to release at 3 a.m., and the lower path would drown a foot deep by 3:40 if you were not watching. I checked the lantern's oil. The meniscus had dipped below half. I set a mental clock and listened for the quiet crash that means the upriver locks have shifted their weight. I heard 3 taps of stone on stone where there were no hands. It is a small sound, but if you have skipped rocks your whole life, you know it. It came from the footing by the second post, then from inside the mask I had touched, light and hollow like someone knocking from within. The bell rang again. Once, and the fog thinned just enough to show me my own breath wandering out over the water in a long line that looked longer than I had lungs for. Unknown before danger keeps you honest. I felt a question in the air I could not answer. Do you know which way is forward if the river stops? The mask should have kept their indifferent faces pointed down. Two of the three now looked upstream. My clipboard edge wore a soot thumbprint that had not been there when I set it down. The silt smell rose and put a coin taste on my tongue. I said June's name into the windless place, then stopped because there's a rule about saying names in places that echo. I had been told a rumor once, from an elder who laughed without humor. If the river wants to cross with a new name, it will borrow a face made of what you burned and a voice spoken from the bank. Turn the faces upstream, and it will stall and show itself. Leave them down, and it will pass wearing who you love. I did not know whether to believe or to respect a thing I could not disprove. That is the trouble with rules that do not come from books. They do not care whether you believe them, only whether you behave as if you do. I turned the nearest mask upstream. It rotated with a grainy sigh. The bell rang once with the sound of metal underwater. The surface went slick as glass. You have seen ponds go still before a dragonfly lands. Imagine a river doing that. The current held its position like a person holding a pose. In the stretch of water between the posts, something shaped like a mouth formed, a soft oval darker than the rest, and in the center a pale line that looked like a small public lie. My lantern hissed, a reminder that not everything wants to be brave past midnight. The red tape on the post corner had 3 knots in it. I would have sworn those knots were not there earlier. The tails hung wet and pinched the way plastic pinches when you have tied it hard with gloved fingers. I touched the knots, and a smell of cold ash came up as if I had opened a stove door on a day you forgot there was ever heat in your house. The warm mask looked warmer. If you have ever put your palm over a mouth to quiet someone, you know the awkward tenderness of that caution. That is how it felt to touch the inside. I walked back for June, but the lower path had taken water early. The release must have begun a few minutes before the hour. I could see her light beyond the small flood. She could not cross without water up to her knees, and the current at the turn would push. I waved and pointed to wait. She texted question marks that bloomed on my screen like minnows. I sent one word, hold. The bell rang once more, and this time my teeth hurt because the tone came from directly beneath the mask. The river had learned to ring without air. The prints on the footing stones returned. Backward treads, then a gap, then nothing, as if a person had stepped into water and not made a ripple. The gum wrapper clung to a weed at the edge, and I wanted to let it convince me of a kid with a whistle and patience. Then I saw the smear my own finger had left on the clipboard. The soot had a faint loop in it, like the lower curve of AJ, the first letter of June's name, written by someone who did not know the rest. The lid on the bigger question jumped on its own. The mask whispered when I lifted it, not words. The sound people make with their lips apart when they test another person's breathing from a polite distance. The hollow eyes framed the river so that I saw water where a face should be. The inside warmth matched my skin. That is a bad sentence to have to say, but it is true. I felt the urge to speak June's name to it, because I wanted it to know where not to go. The rule about names held my tongue. I could taste ash in my teeth like the memory of a winter fire. My lantern's flame shrank to a small blue tear. Oil low, time low. The river held still in that wrong way between posts, and the mouth shape deepened to show the pale line of what looked like teeth that were not teeth. June raised her light and took a step into the shallows without reading the posture of the surface. I had a decision to make. You know the kind. The ones you keep making long after the moment has passed, as if your body wants to practice different outcomes. I put the mask on. It fit too well for something made sloppy by hand. The twine slipped behind my head and the world tilted inside the oval. The smell of wet ash flooded my nose and then shut the sense off as if someone had pinched a valve. Sound came thin through the eye holes, then strong when I breathed 2 slow times and felt the shape of the river try to answer like it was trying to time its exhale with mine. I said a name, but not June's. I said mine twice, and then I said the name I used as a kid that no one here knew because the river likes names that have. The bell rang from under the water. The surface uncoiled and moved forward as if it had been pressed and released. June stopped mid-step and looked at me like I was a stranger, which in that mask I was. The mouth shape in the current opened and bent toward my voice and would have kept going if the upstream faces were not watching. I felt the mask lean toward water though my body stood still. That is the trouble with lending a face. It does not always want to come back the same way it went. Something brushed my wrist. A strand of red tape had tied itself a loop around me while I had both hands on the mask. 3 knots tightened polite as cuffs. I could hear the 3 stone taps again from under the boards now, as if a small, patient thing were counting. The oil hissed long, then stopped. Darkness came in, honest and absolute. Only the shape of river light remained. Starlight bled into motion, and the bell, now pulsing like a heartbeat, I did not own. June started to cross again. I told her to go back without saying her name, and the mask made my words soft and underwater. She heard the tone, not the content. She stepped back. The mouth turned upstream and paused. In that pause, I understood the rule behind the rumor. The faces were not warnings to the river. They were directions. Point them upstream, and the water hesitates the way a person hesitates when 5 friends look at them serious. Point them down, and it will borrow the first name you give it and take it to the other side. The choice had a hook in it. I could turn all the masks upstream and stall whatever this was until first light, if the twine held, and if the dam kept the level low enough for June to wait. Or I could leave one turned down and speak a false name into it like bait and hope the river took that instead. Both choices would echo. One would echo in the number of faces left to hang. The other would echo in my own lungs. I chose quickly because that is sometimes the only honest way to choose. I turned 2 masks to face upstream. I kept one facing down, the warm one. I spoke into it, not June, not mine. I gave it the old name I do not use. The bell struck as if a hand had gripped it underwater. The mouth shape slid forward between the posts and pressed at the gap like a person testing a screen door. The mask heated against my cheeks. I felt the ash pull something small and internal and private, a flavor breath that had nothing to do with oxygen. The red tape cinched and then let go, as if the knots had considered and declined to keep me. June backed up to the gate where her light hovered like a firefly pinned in glass. The water bulged and then rushed, the usual messy, mortal noise coming back. I took the mask off. It was cold now. The inside felt dry and old like a book that remembers a hand. The bell stilled. The gum wrapper flipped once, then drifted, and it pleased me that ordinary trash still made sense when the night did not. I set the mask on the rail. Its hollow eyes looked at me with the wet shine of the river behind them. At 3:40, the lower path flooded, as predicted. We waited on opposite sides, keeping each other in view. The quiet that follows a choice never lasts. You know this. There's always the echo that finds you later and puts a finger on the exact spot where you made the trade. Mine came around 4:10 when my sense of smell returned, which told me it had been gone, and that it had been gone longer than I noticed. It came again when the bell rang a single dull note with no air moving at all. First light peeled the fog back like a child drawing a curtain without permission. We closed the station as normal, signed the log, shut the cabinet. I wiped my clipboard. The soot thumb remained, a faint loop and a line as if someone had started to write a letter and lost the word. June thanked me for waiting and for not calling her name across the water. She said it like a joke, but it did not feel like one. We walked to the lot. Her car started on the second try and mine on the first, which felt too easy, so I was not surprised when I saw what hung from my rearview mirror. One of the masks, the warm one. It dripped river water that had no place to come from. Twine looped the mirror in 3 knots. The bell on the chain at the weir rang across the lot where no fog moved. I took the mask down and set it on the passenger seat and drove home with the window open to try to learn if air could make a rule of its own in my house. That evening, my apartment smelled faintly of ash, which could have been my clothes. I washed my hands and the scent did not leave. Under the sink, 3 small taps sounded against the pipe, patient as a metronome that does not need electricity. I put the mask in the bathtub and watched a thin thread of water collect at the mouth and then soak back in. I said the old name once because curiosity is a kind of hunger. The bell rang in my head then, soft, the way you hear the ocean after you leave it. I hung the mask on a nail on the porch. It turned by itself to face the street like a neighbor who knows when to pretend not to know you. Nights later, at 5:35 a.m., the minute light arrives, the mask is always damp, and the bell at the river rings once with the exact sound of metal underwater. Sometimes my clipboard carries a new thumbprint where no one touched it. If you come by, you will see nothing but a porch ornament and a tired person who smells slightly of old fire. If you ever work a river night and see faces hung to tell the water what to do not use names the current could wear. Turn the ovals upstream when you feel the air go thin and the surface go slick. If you must give a name, consider giving it one you already do not. The river is patient. It learns slowly, then all at once, and it will practice saying whatever you offer it until you hear that sound coming from the place you love most. Story 3. The borrowed name at the fire circle. I used to think a fire only burned what you fed it, until the night our circle exhaled my name through a missing stone and tried to pull me out past the line like a tide. The campground sat under a bowl of sky, so clear it hurt. Pines leaned in as if they wanted to hear. Someone had left a little kettle on the edge of the ring. No flame under it, just the soft ticking metal makes when it remembers heat. The air smelled of sage and char, that clean scent you get when rain finds dust after a long wait. Sparks from earlier lay in the ash like fallen stars, pretending to sleep. I took a breath and felt it drag like the night had weight. I was night host on the shoulder season, the weeks when summer people thin out but stories get louder. Check the loops, kick ash flat, make sure late visitors clean up and do not wander. I could have gone home by midnight, but an elder from town asked if I would sit a while and keep the fire company. He said not to leave the ring open, and he set a little tin of salt by the stones. You can respect a rule without understanding it. I sat with my recorder running and my jacket smelling faintly of smoke and rain. It was supposed to be a quiet watch. My friend Mara stopped by after a shift, and we shared a thermos of coffee that had gone bitter and honest. A kid from a trail crew passed through and dropped a bundle of sticks, talked about headlamps and a cougar sighting that was probably a dog. We were 3. We said we were 3. The recorder clicked and settled on the log beside my boot. It felt good to be counted, because numbers keep you honest when the night wants you to forget who is there. The fire ring was almost perfect. Almost. One stone at the north notch was missing. The gap pointed straight down a side path that wandered into brush and out again near the older benches. It looked like bad maintenance to me, something I could correct with a little effort. But the elder had said not to move stones unless I meant to finish the circle. Salt to seal. Ash to cool. Words to close what words had opened. He had spoken the rules like measurements for a recipe. I did not know then that recipes can be maps. We told small stories. Work gossip. A found owl feather. The way the river sounds different at night, deeper in the throat. I thumbed my locket without thinking. Inside is a tiny charm with the name my grandfather used for me. A name no one here knows, too old and crooked to fit my mouth now. The kettle ticked every few beats like it had its own heartbeat. Sage smoke thinned to a ribbon and slid toward the gap as if the night were breathing through the missing stone. The first wrong thing was gentle. The recorder picked up a laugh that did not belong to any of us. I only noticed because the playback light twitched on for a second as if it wanted to tell me something. Then the wind stilled and the smoke slipped in a straight finger through the open notch and down the side trail. I looked at Mara. She looked back with the face people make when they hear their name from far away. No one had spoken it, not out loud. We tried to blame teenagers. The benches had carvings all over them, initials and years, some so old they were almost polite. A Bluetooth speaker could hide easy in the hollow under a seat. The trail kid volunteered to sweep the area with his light. He came back with gum wrappers and a soda can and a look that said he wanted to be done with this joke. The kettle ticked faster, silly as that sounds. If you have ever listened to a stove cool, You know the sound picks up when a draft changes. I noticed the salt then unopened. The tin was dented like it had lived in a pocket too long. The elder had said to toss it in a ring while the fire was still warm if I had to move a stone. I looked at the gap and felt the way a loose tooth invites your tongue to test it. The smoke kept choosing the same path. The recorder clicked again, and a voice under our voices said my name the way a parent says in a crowd. Not loud, certain. It used the shape of my childhood nickname, the one I do not wear. You know that feeling when a choice arrives and the night takes your hand and opens your fingers to show you there is nothing in your palm except the weight of what you will owe. I stood and slid my boot under the missing stone, levered it upright, and rolled it back where it belonged. It was heavier than it looked, cold all the way through. When it thumped into place, the smoke climbed, paused, then turned like an animal, finding a fence where there had been none. Mara said she smelled rain. There was no cloud to hold it. The trail kid said he heard someone on the path, but his light showed only thorn and empty air. The kettle went silent. That was not comfort. The silence that arrives all at once is like missing a step in the dark. The recorder showed 4 bars. We were still 3. On the bench, old initials ran like a little river of letters. One pair matched the angle of the gap perfectly. The date cut beside them was older than me, older than my normal explanations. It was after 1 when the camp office radio chirped for the midnight check. I answered with our names and loop number, and my voice sounded wrong to my own ear. There's a pitch a person uses when they feel watched. The radio crackled once after I signed off, small hiss like a breath. The fire hissed too, 2 sound trying to agree on a timing. We let it pass because you let small things pass until small is not the size anymore. I opened the salt. It made a tight pop. I walked the circle and let a thin spill fall like a seam. When I came to the notch I had filled, the smoke pushed back and a finger of ash rose and slumped across the stone like a tongue learning a new word. The trail kid stepped too close and scuffed the seam and shrugged and laughed, because what else do people do when they touch something they should not and want to prove they did not? Mara said she heard someone call from the path. I heard it too. It was my name again, but not the way she says it. It came in my grandfather's voice, the sound of winter afternoons and wood stoves and the comfort of being expected. It should have been a safe sound. It was not. It came from beyond the stones and made the side trail look like a hallway. The recorder clicked. The 4th voice rode under the crackle like a fish under ice you only notice when it moves. We split jobs. Trail kid took the path to humor me and to make sure no one had left a speaker. I told Mara to stay in the ring. I stood with the salt at the gap and felt the fire at my knees as a living thing. The kid called back that the brush narrowed and then opened into the old loop near the benches. He said the initials there were the same cursive as the ones by us. He said the wood felt warm where no light had touched it. He said he did not like that and was coming back. The smoke that had been ribbon slender thickened into a rope. It pressed at the stone and found the seam where the kid had scuffed the salt. I saw the thin line of ember uncurl across the gap like a thread being pulled and laid down. The night held its breath. The kettle started ticking again, sharp now, like a cooling engine after a long run. Mara's eyes went unfocused the way people's do when a memory covers sight. That was the first time I felt a tug. Not on my body. On my name. You will think I am being poetic. I'm not. Something in my head that knows who I am moved toward the gap as if pulled by a soft string. It brought with it the childhood nickname I keep tucked away. If you have one, you know how it holds a flavor in your mouth like a favorite candy. The fire wanted that flavor. The missing stone had been a mouth. I had given it teeth. I used the locket as a stopper. I took it off and held it in my fist and put my fist against the sealed seam and said that name once, not out to the path, but down into the ash that still remembered boiling water and salt and older rules. The smoke pulled, then loosened, as if it had lost the thread. The recorder clicked. The 4th voice said the nickname with a question mark, curious, like a teacher learning roll call. The prankster theory fell away with a small sound like a moth's wings. At 2, the radio asked for the second check. I answered clean and heard my own voice lag, as if a version of me, a half step late, was borrowing my breath. The trail kid came back with burrs on his socks and a scratch on his cheek that looked like writing. He swore he had not gone far. He said he heard a kettle ticking where there was no kettle. He said he would sit, and he did, very close to the ring. The hours after two stretch like pulled taffy. Stories lose their jokes. Faces soften with smoke and shadow. The fire burned down to coals that glowed like the insides of fruit. Every time the smoke wanted the gap, it found the seam. Every time it found the scuff, it pressed harder and laid down a new ember thread, as if it were sewing with light. The old initials on the bench looked freshly cut when my lamp passed over them, which is not how age behaves. We heard a far laugh. We all heard it. The kind of laugh two boys make when they have done something small and wrong and gotten away with it. It came from up trail, then from the left, then from the place where the missing stone had been. The recorder flashed a little green. The fourth voice did not laugh. It said my name again, the old one, and this time it sounded like a thing practicing rather than a person remembering. We argued then about moving the stone again, just to see if the smoke would stop its games. Choices late at night are never as clever as choices in the morning. I wanted to test a theory. Mara wanted to keep the rule. The kid wanted to go home. That is 3 votes that do not make a majority. I slid my boot against the stone, and it tipped a quarter turn, and the seam spilled. And in that breath, the smoke ran like a ferret through a fence. I poured salt fast. It made a hiss that sounded like a word I could almost understand. The ember thread flashed and died. The kettle went silent again, then ticked from somewhere behind us. The kid stood and said he would grab water. He stepped toward the path without thinking, because that is what people do when their body remembers a chore. His foot crossed the line of stones, and he froze, one leg in and one leg out, like the world had pinched him between fingers. His mouth opened. He said my name, not his. He said it with a little lift at the end, the way a person asks for help without wanting to admit it. The fourth voice under the crackle said his name at the same time, wrong, as if letters had been rearranged by someone who knew the parts but not the person. The fire brightened without flame, a glow from the ash like a held breath, turning into words. I moved. I took the locket to the gap, pushed it into the hottest place a hand can stand, and spoke the nickname, the one with weight, the one the fire already wanted, but I gave it on my terms, not the path's. I said it as bait. I said it like a parent calling a child back to the car. The smoke turned toward me clean as a dog turning at a whistle. The kid stumbled backward into the circle and fell. Mara grabbed his jacket and pulled him farther in. The ember line brightened near my fist, and then went dull as the salt finally made a seam that held. 3 o'clock arrived in that quiet way clocks have when you're busy not admitting fear. The wood was down to a quarter stack. We fed the fire on purpose until it was small and honest. The radio stayed quiet. The kettle ticked once, politely, as if to say we were not done. The bench initials looked older again, like they had decided to behave. At 3:20, the recorder clicked one last time. The fourth voice said my nickname in a tone that made me feel 8 and happy and about to stand up. I kept my seat by force. I told the others we were not moving until the 4 a.m. check and the last of the wood. The kid slept with his hood up and his hand near the salt tin, like a person who does not believe in rules but hates what happens without them. Mara watched me the way you watch someone in a hospital waiting room who has not cried yet. 4 a.m. came. I said our names into the radio. The fourth voice did not answer. The smoke lifted like a long sigh and went straight up. The sky looked less like a bowl and more like a ceiling that might someday be a window. The kettle gave one more tick and fell still. We sat until the coals went black, then gray. We did the work. Kick ash. Pull what there. Stir. Repeat. Close what we had open with. I carried the stone by myself back to its notch. It was lighter now, or I was stronger, which seems less likely. When it settled, the gap faced nowhere, which is how circles should behave. We salted the seam in a tidy ring. I put my fist on it for a second and felt a faint warmth that could have been the earth, or could have been a word learning how not to be said again. Dawn walked in at 5:36. We cleaned the site. The trail kid went home with red eyes and sat in his car with the engine off for a while. Mara touched my sleeve and asked me not to keep the locket where a fire could smell it. I said I would try. We parted with the sort of hug that says I would like to be somewhere bright right. On my cabin step, the missing stone waited. Not a twin, the stone. Same moss stripe, same coolness. It sat where a friend might sit if they did not want to knock. No drag marks on the dirt, no chip from travel. I looked back at the ring half a mile away and felt a foolish desire to return it before the circle noticed it was gone. Inside, the kettle on my stove ticked once though it had not been lit. The room smelled faintly of sage. The recorder played by itself and made the software tapes make when they are tired. Under our voices, under the crackle, a fourth voice breathed, once in and once out, and then stopped, like a swimmer deciding whether to surface or to swim under the dock where no one looks. If you sit near a fire some night and notice the stones are not quite a circle, think about what that gap points at. If smoke keeps choosing the same way, do not give it your name. If you must, get it one you already outgrew and keep the seams salted. You can respect a rule without understanding it. You can love a night that wants to learn your voice. Just do not follow yourself when you hear yourself from the wrong side of the stones. Story 4. The stone that hums with holes. I did not know a rock could learn my breath until the standing stone took the pitch of my ribs and hummed my name through 7 holes that wanted an eighth. The meadow above the canyon was quiet in a way most meadows are not. No crickets, no late owls, only a low air that made the grass lean without sound. Limestone smelled like chalk after rain. When I touched the carved face of the standing stone, my fingers whitened with fine dust, and the taste of a penny rose to the back of my tongue. If you have ever worked alone with a generator that tries to pretend it is not afraid of the dark, you know the feeling in my... I was overnight watch for a small survey crew. Keep an eye on the portable lights, collect audio of the ridge, so our researcher could model how sound traveled through the old cuts. It was the sort of job you can do with coffee and a stubborn... My co-worker Jamie ran cables to a bowl of limestone chips that we used as a resonator. She swore the stones sang on windless nights. I told her rock does not sing, it only remembers pressure. The standing stone had 7 circular holes bored through its thin end, like a flute made for something with a careful mouth. One hole had a chip where an 1/8 might have been. That absence made my jaw ache in sympathy. We had rules. No moving the stone, no blowing through the holes, out of respect. No name spoken into the face. The elder who walked us through the site said that last part twice, then smiled in a way that was not unkind, but felt like a test. At midnight, we logged the first quiet hour. The compass spun when I set it on the base. I told myself the metal case, picked up something from the generator, and pocketed it fast. The field recorder grabbed a bed of noise and painted it gray. Jamie laughed when static rolled like distant surf. She loved the ghost stories that cling to any place with holes and history. I prefer the stories you can disprove, because disproving is warmer than trust. We placed a shallow bowl beneath the face to catch the little spills of chalk that weather shakes loose. There was no wind, yet the dust gathered in neat rings as if tiny fingers had turned the bowl. The hum came then, low and steady, more felt than heard, like standing on a dock when a boat engine idles without moving. I felt it in my teeth before my ears accepted it, a pressure that matched my breath when I tried not to notice. Jamie thought she heard a voice under the hum. I told her it was bone conduction and caffeine. The quarry siren down canyon bleeped once, a test the company runs before a scheduled blast. The second siren, the one that means they will shake the ridge, was not due until 3:45. Time stretched like gum. The generator coughed, then settled. The compass spun with a lazy confidence that made my hands feel naive. The first wrong thing is never the loudest. Jamie walked behind the standing stone to check the tension on a cable and simply did not come out the other side in a reasonable time. I called her name and got my name back, soft and almost right, the way a child repeats you to be sure they have the shape. The hum deepened when I held my breath and slackened when I exhaled. If that does not trouble you, put a glass against your teeth and speak. I circled the stone and found her footprints stopping where shadow gathered. She answered on the radio with one click, then nothing, then a long breath that may have been mine. The recorder auto saved a voice memo at 3:33, the digits bright on the screen for a second, as if numbers felt proud to be patterns. The bowl of chalk dust held a new ring, wider than the last, like a ripple trying to pretend at its surface. I had choices, and none were good. I could call into the holes and break the rule, or I could wait for the quarry siren and hope the ridge kick would shake her out of whatever corner she had found. Waiting felt like leaving the door unlocked for a thief who already knew the layout. I set wax from our kit and pressed small plugs into 6 of the 7 holes, not to harm, just to listen to what happened when the paths narrowed. Respect goes both ways if you are lucky. Silence is not always empty. The hum vanished from the air and moved into my mouth, a quiet that throbbed inside the teeth and reached down to the place where the jaw hinges. I wanted to swallow it, which is not a sentence I expected to think. The remaining open hole drew a thin line of breath from me, like a straw, though I was feet away. The chipped edge where an eighth might be looked suddenly deliberate, like a seat for an ear. I put my head near the face and felt the urge to set my ear there, to give the stone the last shape it lacked. I did not. I rested 2 fingers on the edge instead, and the dust kissed my skin and printed me gray. My tongue tasted metal again. I said Jamie once soft, not into the hole, but to the space beside it. My voice returned from the stone with my own vowels thinned, curious, not mocking, a child practicing a word until it feels like an object that can be carried. The meadow refused wind. The generator hit the red mark on its fuel gauge. The compass spun once more and then arrested as if some decision had been made. The bowl of dust produced a new ring on its own, and I understood that the stone was not only humming, it was drawing, tracing the shape of the pressure field we made simply by standing and wanting to speak. Patterns love to be completed. That is how trouble invites itself in. Jamie said my name from behind the stone in my voice, which is the kind of sentence a sane person should never have to write. It was not a trick, not a radio loop, not some kid with a speaker. It used the little hesitation I have before the second syllable, the one only people who sit with me at 3 in the morning know. I pressed my forehead to the stone in a motion that felt like a bow, and felt the low hum press back, as if I had said yes to something old. The quarry siren wailed its second note at 3:45. The ridge shivered. The hum did not break. It learned to shake and kept the tune. The wax plugs popped and fell in a wet line on the base, arranged not by gravity, but by intention, a bent smile of white like teeth laid out for a dentist. The missing 8th hole was mine to supply, or to deny, and that choice tasted like chalk and pennies and a promise I had not meant to make. I could call Jamie through the missing hole by speaking her name into the pressure, which would complete the instrument and teach it the route a voice takes. Or I could refuse and let her chase the hum until morning and trust that people return from places where maps fail. Both choices had costs that arrived later with clearer handwriting. I set the recorder to play white noise, the hiss of everyone and no one, and pressed the speaker to the chipped edge. The stone took the noise as if it were food. The hum swelled, then fought, as if fed a taste with no shape. I said Jamie once, and then I said it again, timed to the swell, a small push against a big wave. She answered from the wrong side of the face, my voice riding her breath. Her hand emerged first, gray dust marking the knuckles. I took it without thought and pulled, and the hum climbed my arm like a cat that will not be put down. She came through unremarkably, which is the strangest thing. One moment gone, the next standing and blinking and angry. The dust ring in the bowl widened again, accepting her weight as new data. Her lip wore a faint line of white that tasted like metal when she licked it and frowned. The compass began to tick like a watch, which made no sense, but the ear makes its own rules when it is afraid. We had to clear the site by dawn. The generator coughed. The fuel needle begged for mercy. The recorder flashed low battery, then held on like stubborn friends do. I pulled the wax from the base and put it back in the kit. The small plugs had taken marks, each bearing a shallow impression, as if something had tried to drink through them. The meadow exhaled once and returned to stillness, which is worse than wind when you're listening for a reason not to run. At 4, the recorder auto-saved again. 403, same digits, same sense of a pattern pretending to be coincidence. The hum learned the noise and wore it as disguise, a thin veil between my jaw and my ear. Jamie said she had stepped behind the stone and felt her name become an object someone else carried. If you have ever heard your name said by a person who loves you and felt how it changes weight, you know what she meant. Her eyes would not look at the holes for long. We packed in a hurry because that is how people put off hard thinking. Cables coiled. Light heads tilted to ground. The compass refused to point. I should have left then. I did not. I leaned into the face one last time, because curiosity is a word we use when we mean hunger. The chipped edge fit my ear without asking. The stone produced a sound that had always been my own, and I felt the missing eighth slide in a place with a soft intimacy that felt like trespass. The point of no return is never marked. You only know it when you try to walk backward, and the floor has a memory. I whispered into the hole the smallest promise I could make. I will not give you a voice. The hum changed key, the way a person changes posture when they are not getting what they ask. It reached for my name and found handle. I pulled away and left a little salt of myself on the edge, a dusting that shone when my headlamp dipped. The climax came honest. I set the recorder to output a steady band of white noise, then pink, then a loop of my own voice saying stay, spaced at 3-second intervals. I pressed the speaker to the holes one at a time until the rings in the bowl aligned like ripples pushing at each other. The compass ticked like a heart when my hand shook. The stone wanted the missing eighth to be flesh. I offered a mouth of plastic and a chorus that did not belong to anyone. It took the offer and disliked it. The hum rose to a pitch that would have broken glass if there had been any. The quarry detonation finally landed in the ridge, a delayed thunder that rolled through the ground and made the stone shiver. The rings in the bowl smeared, then steadied. I timed my breaths to not match the swell, a petty rebellion that worked well enough to make me feel less borrowed. Jamie held the generator panel shut when the latch tried to open on its own, like the machine wanted to go look for the song. The white noise filled the holes until they felt full, a strange sentence that nevertheless is true. The hum tried my name and got only hiss, tried hers and got only a seam of static, tried the shape of nothing and filled the meadow with the idea of a storm. I said stay one last time, and it sounded like me again, which frightened me more than anything. Then the hum blinked, the way lights do when power remembers the grid. Silence came like a choice. The compass rested. The bowl held a final ring shaped more like an ear than a circle. The wax plugs lay on the base in a neat line with one missing. The chipped edge looked less hungry. Jamie exhaled in a way that told me she had held brave for longer than I had noticed. We did not touch the stone again. Respect is what you give something that can learn you. We left before first light hit the face. The generator protested, then allowed itself to be wheeled. The recorder died in my pocket with the tired little chirp devices make when they pretend they are not part of the story. In the truck, the wax plugs had migrated to the dash without either of us moving them. They had arranged themselves into a bent smile and a blank. The blank was where a tooth would be if the mouth were mine. Dawn at 5:36 felt like a doctor opening a door. The meadow looked ordinary, which is not the same as safe. We signed a log and promised each other we would not be clever with holes again. Jamie washed the dust from her mouth and found the taste still there, a ghost of metal that made coffee seem kind. She hugged me without quite closing her eyes, as if she did not want to see what closed its eyes behind hers. At home, my floor hummed once at 6:03, a time that felt chosen by an object rather than a clock. It was a low tremble through the boards, a sound that lined up with my heartbeat until my heartbeat tried to be polite and moved over. The compass on my shelf ticked like a watch with no hands. The taste of chalk returned when I breathed near the vent, and a fine white dust ringed the grate as if the house had been listening at a hole. If you ever find a stone drilled like a flute waiting for a mouth, remember that absence is sometimes an invitation. Do not give it your ear. Do not offer your name where pressure gathers. If you must speak, feed it noise you do not mind hearing again. The earth loves patterns. It will practice you if you let it, and it does not always know when to stop. Story 5. The lantern that would not go out. I thought I understood fire. It needs fuel, it needs air, it needs a match. That was before I spent a night with a lantern that grew brighter when I spoke and thinned to a blue thread when I held my breath like I was hiding. The canyon shelter is a small square of dry wood hooked to a cliff. Wind pulls a long note through the plank, gaps the way rope sings when you haul it. The door creaks in 3 small clicks, even if you palm it quiet. Inside, someone hung 3 glass chimes on a wire, thrift shop ghosts that move when there is no draft. The lantern sits on a hook by the wayfinding map. Brass gone dull, handle polished by worried hands. The air smells of hot iron and wild sage that has forgotten summer. My shift was simple on paper. Inspect the shelter, test and extinguish lamps for the log. Watch weather, close the gate if the storm cell hopped the ridge early. I like paper rules. They make a knight behave. The metal inspection tag had a note stamped into it beside the checklist. Do not let this one die at night. Beneath it, a schedule. Frayed on the trestle at 3:12 a.m. 40 seconds of canyon suck. The kind of number that sits quiet until it stands up. The wick looked wrong up close. Not a fat cotton ribbon, but a narrow braid. Hair fine. Red threads ran through it like old survey, tape twisted into the fibers. The chimney glass wore soot at the crown like a halo that had not been cleaned. Oil gauge showed a 3rd tank. I lit it to test the draw, and the flame rose in a clean line and then leaned toward my mouth as if it expected a word. I set my call sign to hear a human shape in here. The flame brightened. When I fell silent, it calmed. I cupped a hand and blew across the vent to check the pull. The flame did not care about moving air unless the air had syllables in it. The chimes did not ring when wind pressed the door. They rang once when I held my breath to see if the light would thin. The sound was the kind glass makes in dishwater. The sound a thought makes when it runs out of air. There was a handprint on the door glass. 3 fingers and the hint of a palm, low like a child's reach. I wiped it with a sleeve. It came back a handspan lower, soot gray, more patient than sneaky. Around the map, a ring of scorch looked like a wreath. Gas leak, I thought, even though there is no supply in this building. My brain wanted plumbing and pipes, and a cause you can wrench. Nate checked in from the bridge. He was running cables for the beacon heads. He told me to stop talking to myself. I told him the flame brightened on words. He said the old lantern's carbon up and act proud. I wanted to believe him. The store model pinged my phone. The cell had stepped off the far ridge early. Pfeiffer would sit over our heads and decide if the bridge belonged to water or to us. I tried to snuff the lantern for the log, turned the key, lowered the braid, eased the cap down like a lid on soup. The flame crouched, then flowed sideways into the seam and stayed alive the way a person holds a breath under a door. I pinched the chimney with a folded glove. The light whitened and made a small sound like a throat clearing. I said ridiculous, and it flared. I said not funny, and it leaped again the way fire jumps at grease. A chime rang in still air. There's a tone that makes the tongue go dry, as if your mouth believes the room first. The inspection tag shimmered with a smudge of heat that was not heat. My name sounded in the chimney thin and far, like a lost voicemail. I do not scare easy, but the sound of your own words coming from place your mouth is not will make you calculate faster. 312 came like a train inside a long throat. Air went horizontal. The bridge sang 3 notes as boards moved a hair. The flame thinned to a blue line as my body did the stupid thing and held breath. The chimes rang under the noise like bells 2 rooms away. I opened my mouth to give it air, not because I wanted to, but because my hands had already reached for the key and found nothing that worked. The light drank the shape of my breath and grew steady. Nate stepped out to the midpoint to tighten a slack line. His headlamp swung, came back a half board to the right. The beacons on the far side pivoted a thumb width, following something I could not see. I radioed to wait. He said he could beat the wind. The lantern leaned toward the door, toward the bridge, toward the sound of a name it wanted me to say. Unknown before danger keeps you honest. The first real question rose without an answer. If the flame brightens on voiced air, and the beacons snap to attention when it does, who is steering the safe line? Me with my mouth, or the thing that eats what my mouth makes? I whispered nonsense to see if the light would flare without meaning. It did. Meaning did not matter. Pressure did. Beat one settled in. The gas leak theory behaved until it met the oil gauge. The needle did not drop. I had given the lamp 10 minutes of words, and it had not touched the third tank. The scorch ring around the map did not smell like fuel. It smelled like a mini-night habit. The door glass printed a third hand, 3 fingers, gray and small. The chimes went silent when wind hit and rang when the world held still. The rule turned. Wind was not food. A voice was. Nate called that he wanted to realign a beacon at the near quarter. The storm ran the ridge line and tugged threads of rain across the notch. The map lights drifted in small degrees, like a compass reluctant to admit a truth. I told the flame I was fine. It leaped. I tried a cleaner sentence. I'm afraid. It steadied without the jump. Lies push harder. Truth holds the light without tugging the path. I want to memorize that, but the train vacuum had set another clock in my ribs. Beat 2 carried the bridge. The plank line moved in the air more than on wood. It is hard to describe without drawing. The beacons treat light like a string, and the lantern pins that string to a board that might not sit there otherwise. Nate knows the bridge better than anyone I work with. He stepped once on what should have been familiar ground and looked down like the board had whispered. He asked me to call it. He meant say his name. I kept my mouth shut. The flame thinned at once. 3 glass notes trembled and went quiet. The chimes were listening for my breath, like a child eavesdropping a parent's whisper to decide whether to sleep. The oil needle still refused to move. The braid on the wick had a burned red seam like the memory of someone tying it with tape and hair. I could not stop imagining the hands that made that braid and the names they said while tying. Beat 3 landed exactly where the schedule said. The 312 pull faded, but the echo it left kept the bridge wanting. Nate committed to the middle third to finish and turn back before the storm sat on us. He had 2 options: cross clean to the far side and wait, or come back to me under the shelter lip. He chose the midpoint because that is where the job sat, and the job pays rent. The flame brightened when he said my call sign to the air. It wanted that shape. It wanted that push. Isolation arrived on a line. The radio dropped to static and came back full like someone had cupped it. The gate alarm flickered twice on the panel and slept. I held my breath by accident, because sometimes your body protects you from yourself, and the flame drew thin and small and blue. The beacons drifted a degree. Nate paused with 1 foot set and 1 hunting. The chime struck once like a spoon on glass in a sink full of water. The soot handprint pressed harder as if a shorter body leaned its weight into asking. I cut the red tape from my kit. A memory rose clean. A woman who taught me trails, tying tape in 3 small knots to show a way through fog. She said a knot is a spoken thing you can hold. I tore a sprig of sage from the shelf bundle left for visitors, crushed it to release the smell, tied it to the handle with the tape. The iron heated my palm without burning. I told myself I was sealing the braid from taking more of my voice than I meant to give. The lamp did not agree or disagree. It listened. Revelation does not announce itself. It just changes what you can ignore. The lantern was not cursed to burn for its own sake. It was trained or tasked to hold a path in place for people with names. It ate the push in words because push is what moves a line against wind. Lies carry extra push, so the flame loved them because they give more than they owe. Truth is thinner but honest. The scorch ring around the map read like a practice circle. The handprints were not warnings. They were reminders of those small nights the lamp had already been fed. I tried the red herring one last time, because hope likes tools. I checked the floor seam for gas smell, sage and iron. Nothing else. I covered the chimney with a wet glove and starved it. The light guttered and then drew a long drink the moment I spoke to say that was. It grew tall. If you have ever watched a dog return to a door it knows opens, you know exactly that feeling. Point of no return is a phrase people say as if it has a flag tied to it. Mine came quiet. Nate said my name to place himself on the bridge. The lantern rushed to meet it with a small, greedy jump. The beacons shifted a finger. He did not see the drift. I did. I could let the flame wither and keep the map from moving, but he would stand in a vacuum left by a train that had gone 30 minutes ago. Or I could feed the light with a name and stabilize the line and let it learn more of me than I wanted it to know. I chose a third path that still counts as a trap. I opened a voice memo app and played a loop of recorded breath and white noise I keep for sleep. I held the speaker near the chimney. The flame leaned, confused by air that had shape and no promise. I did not say his name. I said a name I used as a kid, a small name with a joke in it that no one on this crew knew. I said it softly, shaped by care, and the flame brightened enough to pull the line without snapping it. The climax was careful work. I lowered the braid until the flame crouched like a cat watching a bird. I held the phone at the vent and let it pour meaningless breath into the lamp. I spoke only the old name on the exhale, once, twice, 3 times, timing each with the way the beacons drifted and settled. Nate came 2 boards, then 3, then stopped again when wind pressed the canyon like a parent scolding a child. I lied once. I said almost there. The flame jolted and dragged the light half aboard. It reminded me who was really steering. I swallowed. I told the truth. I said I am here. The light held without tug. Rain arrived with weight. It pinned my jacket shoulders and ran down my palms to the brass. The sage on the handle bled green into the tape. I dipped 2 fingers into a puddle and flicked water at the braid. The flame hissed without anger and kept shape. The 3 glass chimes rang together, each a different note, each clear. Nate stepped into my light and found boards that behaved, and we did not speak until the shelter roof accepted both of us like a held breath released. We stood there and tried not to thank each other like people in a movie. He looked at the oil gauge and laughed without humor. It had not moved. He asked if we had broken rules. I said probably. He said the bridge had felt like someone was pulling the floor 1 stitch at a time. He would not look straight at the lantern, and I did not blame him. The braid wick had darkened where the sage water touched, and the red threads looked less bright, as if color had gone back into memory. Dawn makes brave, choices look ordinary. First light softened the cliff at 5:35, and the storm dropped its last handful of rain like someone late for a bus. We opened the gate to a sky that pretended it had never meant harm. I wrote the log without poetry. Lamp operational. Lantern left lit per tag. Bridge cleared. Nate signed and drove away with the radio off like a person who has had enough voices for one morning. At the apartment door, the air smelled faintly of sage. I do not keep sage at home. The clock on my stove, which never keeps time, ticked once and lost the plot. On the bedroom window, 3 faint smudges lifted and darkened until they matched the reach of small hand, 3 fingers and a palm, and then they faded like someone disappointed by the light. In the bathroom mirror, a flame no candle made brightened when I said I'm fine. It thinned when I closed my mouth. It steadied when I said I am tired, and I am afraid I taught something how to follow me. The chimes rang once from my doorknob. I do not own chimes. The sound was a single glass note without a draft to explain it. I stood very still and listened to the shape of my own breath, as if it belonged to a room that remembered me. The flame in the mirror softened when I said one more truth to feed it without feeding it. I said I will go back with company, and we will seal the braid with water and the sage bundle, and we will not give our names to it again. If you ever find a lamp that will not die in a place where the path can move, treat it like a tool that knows too much. Feed it care, not names. If you must lie, lie backward with a name nobody follows. If you must speak truth, speak the kind that steadies your feet, not the kind that drags someone else forward. And if 3 glass chimes ring when the room holds still, someone smaller than you is checking whether the way stays open, and the flame is learning the shape of your